Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual event with Orbit Live and two great historical fantasy authors. H.G. Parry is the author of A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians, which is out today in the US. Alixs E. Harrow is the author of The 10,000 Doors of January and the upcoming The Once and Future Witches, which comes out in October. Hannah and Alix will be talking to each other about their books, but they'll also be answering your questions during this event. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see an Ask a Question button. You can enter your questions there and also vote on your fellow attendees' questions so that the most popular questions are the first to get answered. This event is being recorded, and after it concludes, you'll be able to watch the replay and share it with your friends using the same Crowdcast event link that you used to enter. And follow us on Crowdcast to be notified about future Orbit Live events. We have a great one tomorrow with Alistair Reynolds and Adrian Tchaikovsky, another event next week, and lots of other cool stuff still being scheduled. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to turn the event over to Hannah and Alix. Take it away, you guys.
Thank you, Ellen. You're the best.
Yes. And hello, everyone watching.
So we, of course, naturally, I think, as is clear from our books, are the kind of people who would over-prepare. I would guess, we're the kind of people who are like A student, lots of notes. So we have lots of our own questions, and we're going to start with a couple of those for each other because we both read each other's books and enjoyed them. I mean, I enjoyed hers at least. And then we'll switch over to some audience.
Yeah.
So both of our books are historical fantasy, and they're like very different flavors of historical fantasy. And so the first thing that I wanted to ask about is sort of this fact versus fiction thing, and where you chose to be fictional and where you chose to stick very strictly with actual historical fact.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, first of all, mine's very heavy on historical fact. So the conception of it was it basically came from that I really love historical fantasy that's very dense and character driven and dialogue heavy and stuff that takes real historical figures and sort of tries to get inside their heads and work out what was going on. I talk about Hilary Mantel all the time, but also like people like Jude Morgan and Stephanie Parkin, and I really love that thin line they walk between biography and story, and where history sort of becomes the story rather than the setting for something else. So I kind of wanted to take that and say, could I do that kind of a book, but could I do it but add magic as well? So yeah, that was basically where it came from. It came from starting with the historical characters and the historical events, and then seeing how you could tell that same story and have that same level of historical research, but do it as a fantasy as well. So yeah, well, that's basically where it came from.
And you have a lot of, and I say this with great love, and as a person who has formerly taught history and has a master's in history, history can be kind of boring, especially the history of like social change. I mean, like certain kinds of movements, it's a lot of societies and a lot of meetings and a lot of speeches on floors. And I wonder how you kept the dramatic tension and made that exciting. Because I struggled with that doing Suffragists. I was like, oh my gosh, guys, very few chase scenes in the history of American suffrage.
Yes, definitely. There definitely needs to be more monster attacks in the history of Parliament. So, and I mean, first of all, I think it was kind of what I was saying earlier, that it's really about making it about the characters or about the people, because I sort of find with history that if I'm reading about a parliamentary debate, even when the issues are really important, I don't necessarily, you're not necessarily riveted. But if you're thinking about it from the point of view of the people arguing, then it's a double layered. On the one hand, it's about those events, but on the other hand, it's always about them calculating, like how far can I go? Do I sacrifice my, political standing to make a stand on this, or do I play it safe? What can I say that's going to turn things around? So it's really about, for those scenes, It was kind of about staying inside the head of the people and looking at what the personal stakes are and how that's playing into the character arc, as well as how that's playing into the bigger social picture. But I do have to say, I probably erred on the side of letting it go on a bit longer than I than you necessarily than you were afraid of, because I'm really interested in a lot of that stuff, and I kind of thought, well, I'd hate to sometimes cut things that I'm interested in, because there might be other people out there that would like to see it as well, and I can't keep complaining that people don't put things in fiction that I want to see if I don't put them in there as well. So yeah, it's like a bit of both. And yeah, what about you? So I mean, it's the same thing applies to you, obviously, that your books obviously are very close to real life in some ways, and it's drawing on the women's suffrage movement, and it's also drawing on that older history of witch burning and folk tales. And so, yeah, how did you decide what you wanted to include? And particularly when you have these two things, so one's about suffragists, which is reasonably recent history, one's about witch hunts, which is further back, and they're historically quite distant, but thematically they just come together so beautifully. And yeah, how did you decide to keep? What did you decide to go with?
I didn't have as clear, I think, a guiding light as you did, where you were like, I want to do this kind of rich historical fiction. Instead, I started from the place of suffragettes, but witches. And that was it. That was my guiding light. That was the whole thing.
That's the loving, yeah.
And so I started out actually a lot closer to historical fact, and I was very concerned with like specific people and places and who was where and what strides were made at different times in this movement. And it quickly ran into the fact, which I already intellectually knew, but it's different approaching it from like a fiction writer's perspective, that women's rights are like at least 200 years, probably more, of effort. And it's transatlantic, and it's huge, and it's messy, and there's some of it's state by state, and some of it's concentrated. Like there's no single place that I could logically feel like I could pick that would make sense to put a single novel that was supposed to be about restoring witchcraft and getting the right to vote. And so I kind of decided, like, if you heard that old quote, I can never remember if it's George Bernard Shaw or Mark Twain, because they're kind of interchangeable in terms of quotes, but the one that's like, history never repeats itself, but it rhymes.
Yes, yeah.
Which I love, because it's true. And so I decided to try and make my book rhyme with history rather than really be history. So I gave myself free rein. I invented a new city. We're in a new timeline. None of the women in this are specific suffragists, although all of them are like pieces of them amalgamated together. And I let myself kind of have total free rein to smash things together. So like there's the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire doesn't actually happen, but there is a garment factory that burns down and takes women with it due to poor working conditions and the exploitation of their labor. So I tried to stay true to the themes, but not true to the real things that happened, because that was really hard and boring in a lot of meetings. And it wasn't as fun as I wanted it to be.
Yeah, and I think it's trying to find that balance, isn't it? Because you want to mythologize history in a way, but you also want to stay true to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So no, excellent. Shall we?
There's some questions. We should probably look at.
Yeah, I was going to say, do we keep going with our questions, or do we want to? Let's see if we can pick one. You go first.
Okay, the top one is: do you read your book reviews, and if so, what are you looking for in a review?
Oh, good question. Well, for me, it's like that. Yeah, officially, no, I don't read book reviews. That would be a terrible thing to do. Why would you do that to yourself?
Goodreads, what's that? I've never even heard of that site.
I don't know. I've never looked on Amazon in my life. Who needs to know? Unofficially, more than I want to. I don't know. In terms of what you're looking for, I don't know. It's nice to. I mean, it's nice to see people say they really like it. Really. But also, it's always nice when people kind of get to grip, you can see people that understand what you were trying to do and trying to, get to grips with that. Which is lovely. And and sometimes, I mean, even with the negative ones or the not so negative ones, sometimes you can still see that people were giving you credit for what you were trying to achieve, and that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I read reviews all the time because I'm a fool. Like I should, and I was so proud of myself the first time around. Like I had finally weaned myself off of checking reviews for the 10,000 Doors, and I was like, I've done it. I've ascended. I'm on a higher plane now. And then I have a new book coming out, and I'm just on Goodreads all the time.
Oh my God! Yes, I know.
Turns out it restarts. You're just in the same place you were before.
I know, and when you've only got a handful coming in, you swing so wildly between, 1 star, someone gave it a bad review, I've written the worst book, I hate it. Someone gave it a 5 stars, it's written great book, I love it. And exactly. After a while, it kind of evens out that you just have so many competing opinions that you can just kind of be chill about it. But when it's first coming out, no way.
I would say, there's definitely a part of me that doesn't fully believe that my book is really published and is out there, and just people I don't know who aren't my mom are buying it and are reading it and having opinions about it. And so there is something, even a negative review does feel a little bit like it's this confirmation that someone read it and they took the time to go onto a site and review it. And it just always a little bit feels insane to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it always feels like they're talking about someone else's book that's not yours. In a way.
All right. Do you want to pick an audience question?
Pick one. I like that one. The next popular and I like is, what was an early or most memorable experience where you learned that language had power?
I write about that. You'd think I have a better answer to that.
Yeah, I know. Me too. Yeah. Likewise.
I mean, I don't know. I grew up in an extremely bookish household, and I kind of suspect that you did too. And so, it wasn't a single moment where I was like, "Oh, books are great." I mean, they were fed to me very intentionally from an early age. I don't know. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I was lucky. I had a mother that worked in school libraries, so I was there all the time. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely remember reading early things. I remember, and it's not quite the right answer. It's not quite the same thing, but I remember reading a lot from I remember when I was reading through the Chronicles of Narnia books, which were extremely powerful at the time. But I remember coming back to because I read them in the publication order, like you're supposed to, pretty much. And so I think I read Magician's Nephew last. And it's that moment where you start to get the explanations for everything that you've encountered in the Narnia books, and especially, stuff like the lamppost being thrown, and that's where and that's where it grows out of, and the tree growing in the garden, and that's what makes the wardrobe and that kind of thing. And I just remember being incredibly excited by that idea of stories kind of coming together and making things make sense in a way, and the power that had within the story, but also obviously the power that can have outside in the real world as well. And so I think with books, and when I'm writing and I'm reading, I'm always trying to get something like that moment, something where it just feels like everything is being, even though I think C.S. Lewis was making it up wildly as he went along, but in a way that makes it even better, that idea that feels like everything in that story world is just kind of coming together at the right moment, and it's exactly how it's meant to be. And I think the story's got
exactly what you mean. And I was, as you were talking, I was like, it's probably Watership Down, the stories within the book, you get the whole mythology of rabbit culture. And I just remember reading those and feeling like I understood rabbits. Like I understood this whole secondary world and what they believed, and like the sense that I could have told another one of the trickster tales that's in that, because I had such a firm grasp of what they were about. But in terms of
Yes.
like, if the question meant like, were language having power in terms of like it's personally empowering, I will also say in middle school they instituted a dress code, and I wrote like a letter to the principal, and I got all of my friends to sign it, and then the dress code was removed, probably for other reasons, but it felt amazing.
Yeah.
It was the most empowering thing. I was like 12, and I was like, I've done it. I've liberated women. You're welcome. It was amazing.
Congratulations. That is amazing.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
You struck a blow. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get in the way and ask a question from one of ours, because I just really wanted to ask you this, which is basically, so one of the things about history is that it's boring, but the other thing about history is that it's sad. And I wonder how you balance basically the harsh realities of, since yours actually deals with the Atlantic slave trade quite a bit and the entire economy that's built on slavery and abolitionism, how do you balance the really grim realities that you're dealing with kind of still giving people a hopeful book that feels good to read?
Yeah, and obviously I'm going to ask that straight back at you, but to start, and for me that was something that it became more of a, like when I first wrote it, it was one book, and it was obviously it was a lot simpler book, and so it was grim, and it got grim and it got depressing in parts, obviously, but I knew I was heading it towards and kind of no spoiler because I might change the ending entirely, but at the time it obviously had a really hopeful ending, and then when it kind of grew and I was splitting into two books, I sort of hit, oh no, this is gonna deal with all the darkest stuff really in the first book, and it's gonna end on a note that without spoilers, not necessarily the most, it's got more to go. Should you say? I've lost my ending. So, but I mean, please, when you get to the end of the book, I'm not ending it like that permanently. Please know there's more to come. I would never do that. But yeah, so in terms of book by book, though, I decided really early on that it was really going to be a book. Each strand was really going to be about a particular relationship between two characters. So each one's got a sort of friendship caring at the start, and so it's a lot of the humor's coming from those friendships. So because we've kind of seen proof of that in real life. When people are in dark times, they don't sit around going, "We're in dark times." They make jokes and they lift each other up and they debate with each other and they challenge each other, and there's a lot of kind of hope and joy to be found in those kind of human interactions when things are at stake like that. And also just the fact that you're dealing with characters that are resisting and a lot of the time, and they're trying to change things, not always necessarily changing things, making the right choices, but they're always seeing an end goal and they're trying to make things better. So I think those two things and that focus is really what you've got to keep coming back to, even when things on a large scale are really terrible. And
I loved Pitt and Wilberforce so much. Their relationship is wonderful. It was complicated, but it felt like a real friendship, and having banter in the middle of like rising international tensions and the debate for abolitionism, which are losing, and all that stuff was really amazing.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. No, I loved writing those two, and I love those dialogues. And I mean, historically, their friendship was one of the starting points, because it was like, just you read the letters they wrote to each other and the diary entries they've got about them, and it's such an interesting, complicated relationship but it was so full of humor and so full of mutual support. And it was really interesting. And I was gonna say, back at you, your book's the same. Obviously, you're dealing with a whole lot of terrible things to do with the treatment of women and the suppression of women, and both in terms of witch trials and in terms of abolition. Suffragism. And so how did you do the same thing? How did you keep it feeling so empowering and uplifting?
Not as well, I don't think. It was the thing I think I struggled with most writing it, and that's why I wanted to ask you about it, because earlier drafts and outlines kind of delved deeper into the more awful things because I was doing all this like historical research, and the experiences of women are not great, like in especially if you are not dealing with sort of the thin privileged class of women at the top, and if you really are trying to like capture the experiences of women who were poor, who were not straight, who were not white, like it just it felt kind of crushing after a while, even just reading it. And you're right, trying to combine sort of the history of the persecution of witchcraft with suffrage. It's like if you want to pick two groups of women that especially didn't get treated great, rebellious women who were advocating for their rights and people accused of witchcraft are really a group that doesn't get a lot of happy endings. So I super struggled with it, and I rewrote it, actually. And one of the things that I decided is that I remembered that I was writing a fantasy book, which is important, and that it wasn't strictly about recreating historical reality, and it was more like I could make magic fill in some of the places where they were like powerless in actual historical situations. I could give them power, and I decided it was actually more about restoring witchcraft and like women getting this sort of innate and deep magical skill rather than getting political rights written down and like, so it became a witchier book over time because I found more empowerment and more joy in witchy revenge than I did in the slow, often failing fight for rights.
But I mean, that's why they work so well together, isn't it? Because in some ways you have a group of people in the past that didn't, that weren't able to defend themselves, and you have a group of people in the slightly more recent past that did manage to win through politically, and so being able to give magic to one and combine it with the second.
What if you guys just got together and made this work out? Because it's grim.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't you just blast the patriarchy?
Yeah, and I was just really, it's grim too and I knew this going into it, but really coming face to face with the fact that like when you talk about particularly early waves of American women's suffrage, you're talking exclusively about white women and generally wealthy white women and generally married wealthy white women. Not always, but like mostly. Like, and so the great triumphal narrative of 1920 and getting the vote passed is like, for who though? Whose triumph is that? And I really wanted it to be something that felt more democratic and more inclusive, which we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that about your book, that it does such a great job of, even though your main characters are, well, they're white women, they're not privileged, but they but you draw in all those other kinds of women, like queer women and trans women and black women and all those different experiences. Yeah, and it's really beautifully done. Shall we?
Can I steal a question from the audience because I like it?
Yes, please do.
What recent or forthcoming releases, not each other's, are you most excited about?
Oh my goodness, so many.
As soon as you ask that, of course, all books leave your mind.
Yeah, I've
never read a book before in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I write, because it's on my mind. Right now I'm reading The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart, and I love it. And it's just the world building so beautiful, but characters are so vivid, and they feel so familiar and so knowable right from the start. So yeah, I'm really excited about that one coming out. I'm excited about finishing it too.
I read and blurbed that one also because it's great, and it's like if you're a person who liked kind of the sprawling 90s epic fantasy in a secondary world, but doesn't love like how dudeish and white and manly it sometimes gets, like, this is the answer. There's cute magical animal companions, there's lesbians. It's very satisfying. I had such a good time reading that book.
Oh yeah, it is. There's such a lot of world building, but it's so much fun as well.
Yeah, very smoothly done world building. I'm very excited about Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which comes out, I think, in a week or this week. very
Oh,
soon.
yeah.
I read it. I got obsessed with it. It's exactly
I'm
like
so jealous that you've already read it.
yes, I'm very privileged. If you are a Crimson
Yeah.
Peak kind of a girl or a person, but just specifically talking to the Crimson Peak girls who like long to see like a tragic woman leaving a haunted house in like a ruined wedding dress while like a dark man watches her
Yeah.
from the windows, like that kind of a vibe. It's that, but it's in rural 1950s Mexico, and it's amazing. It's so good.
Oh,
Yeah, I loved it.
no. So excited for that one. There are too many books in too little time. Should I try and pick an audience question? Oh goodness. Oh goodness. This is one we were going to ask each other, so it's good to, so how is that? There's a question about how much research goes into developing your books, and we were going to ask each other how the research process went for that. So, yeah, how was the research process on Once and Future Witches? Yeah, I know
was
you
just
talked a
checking
little bit
your
about.
answer. When I asked you that question in email, you wrote back, ha 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 ha, sub. So, how was your
Yeah,
research? I want you
my
to answer
answer.
first. What was the
I
research
want to
like,
answer.
Hannah?
Oh my god! I mean, I think I've said this on Twitter that I started writing this book, Declaration. I started writing it in 2014, so that was 6 years ago. um, and yeah, it was really one of those cases. I mean, well, one way of saying it is if I'd known what I was getting into, I probably wouldn't have done it. The other way is in terms of research, and the other thing is it really is. It's like that, that what people say about when a frog will hop in water and just the water will get more and more boiling and they won't notice because they're in it. It is kind of like that. I started out with like I have a fair chunk of knowledge about specific, I think because I at the time I was doing English lit for academic purposes. I was kind of doing history research just for fun, and I didn't have anything to really do with it. So I was like, well, it'll be really great if I take some of these things and see if I can put them into a book, put them into a book. And so I started doing that. And of course, the more you do that, the more you realize, okay, this is only a very small part of the story. I need to go wider. I need to go wider with this and so forth. And so, yeah, sort of 6 years later, you've got hours and hours and hours racked up in libraries and various places, and and it's massive. But yeah, I think
Did you
I mean it was.
do? Sorry, did you do
Sorry.
most of your research like before the writing started, or did you do it like kind of as you were writing?
I mean, yeah, it was really an as like I had a chunk going in, and I mean I really started with biographies, which is partly because I sort of find that again like it's I find it quite hard reading history books in the abstract, but once you've sort of got a biography, you start becoming interested in all these things because they affect the person in the biography, and that gives you things to sort of go off and look at. So it really sort of worked like that. Like I had a bunch of historical figures to start with, and I sort of started with reading about them, and then that got bigger and bigger, and that sort of gave you a sort of jump off point to when you can sort of start reading about the wider political world and stuff. So I had a fair chunk of that before I started writing, but then they say I kept sort of drafting and redrafting, and I'd stop and go away and do some more research and so forth. I was very lucky because for unrelated reasons, I was in England and Paris for chunks of this at some points over years, so I could sort of go and visit places. I got I nearly got stuck in William Wilberforce's house at closing time. I was in the library and a guard came and found me and kicked me out. So
That's amazing. That's
yeah.
amazing.
And it would not have been fun to be stuck there all night because there is a very creepy Madame Tussaud waxwork from 1933 in that house.
Amazing. I mean, also though, it could have changed the entire course of the book. There would have been haunted waxworks. Yeah.
It would have, yeah.
What's amazing to me, because it definitely would have spoken to you or cursed you or something.
Oh God, yeah.
What's amazing to me is how different our research like inclinations are, I can't get through a biography if you pay me.
Really?
Like, and I have a master's in history. Like, I do care about history quite a bit. But when it becomes individualized, I zone out. Like, I'm a person who was in history for cultural themes. I loved the kinds of academic history that was like, you know, gonna tie together in a huge section of like cultural development and look at all these broad themes. And like, you can kind of zone out. The individual people don't matter that much. We're talking about like, we're analyzing the texts that were produced in this period from this press or something like that, you know, like material history and thematic history and individual lives. I have such a struggle with. I know more about Robespierre, I don't even know how to say his name, and Wilberforce and Pitt from your book than I do from my master's in history. Yeah, and I actually tried to read a couple of biographies and memoirs from suffragists for this book, and I was like, nope, can't do it. So I did broader, like some of the academic works on witch burning and academic works on suffrage and race and that kind of, like I could do thematic research. And then for individuals, it was a lot shorter, and that's why they became mashups of people and they became totally invented characters. Like none of these people are reflecting any actual arcs that real humans lived through.
Oh, that is so interesting. Yeah, no, it's so interesting. You get that studying English too. You get the people like were among them who just really want to delve really deeply into one specific book, and then you get the people that are really interested in those overarching, you know, movements and themes and how, you know, you can put them together. And I find both really interesting. But
I mean, that's fascinating because of how our books turned out. Like, I would actually have guessed that about who we are as people, because yours are so biographical and they're like portraits of specific characters. And it's not like they're not tied to their broader movements, because I think you did that really, really well. But like, it's a people book, and that's so interesting. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pick another audience question if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to ask this one. It's not super high voted, but I just want to know, because it's for you, what is your favorite Dickens novel?
That's both a hard and an easy one. Yeah. But my favorite Dickens novel that is everything a Dickens novel is to me is Great Expectations. Because it's just one of those books that to me is about everything Dickens is. It's got that coming of age story, really that's really good and really tight. It's got all those kind of eccentric characters. It's got Miss Havisham, for God's sake, you know, and Magwitch and all that kind of trappings, but it's also so intensely interested in the social situation and so good at making those, and both kind of trying to cast those lights on these different kind of dispossessed people in history, but also trying to bringing that together in a way where all those kind of Victorian trappings, like those, you know, the coincidences, the larger in life, those big casts, kind of come together and make this argument about the class system and about how we're all connected as human beings and about how the criminality actually exists in the aristocracy rather than in the lower orders. And the fact that without spoiling the ending, just the way it manages to make that Victorian trope of, oh, everyone seems coincidentally to be related to each other, to be this moral argument about class and about the criminal justice system is just so good, and it's so much fun. And I also, for personal reasons, it's a different one, but I also really love Tale of Two Cities for obvious reasons.
I would have guessed your personal one would be David Copperfield because of.
I love David Copperfield as well. Yeah, no, definitely.
I'm not surprised that you like all the Dickens novels.
Yeah. No, but I love David Copperfield as well. Yeah. the first half of David Copperfield is my favorite. It's one of my favorite Dickens. There's stuff that goes on in the second half, which drops it slightly without. But no, I love David Copperfield as well. And obviously, Tale of Two Cities, I love unsurprisingly because I wrote a book about the French Revolution. But it's a different one because it's obviously a lot slower in some ways, and it's a lot broader, and the characters aren't quite so colourful. But the last few pages are just so tear-worthy. And Charles, I want to ask you, what's a good one? What's a good top voted one? The top voted one at the moment is, we've kind of talked a bit about writing process. The other top voted one is the top voted one is, what would you each describe your writing process? How does your process work usually?
Every time I get a question like this, I always think, like, wouldn't it be so great to have a writing process? I would love that. I would love that for myself.
Yeah,
that would be great. I am a person who outlines a lot. Increasingly, I am aware as I am outlining that the outline is false. That's become very stressful to me. Like, I know that it's not going to adhere to that. And it was useful before to write with the blind confidence and belief in my outline and this idea that it was like a true and golden document that was going to see me through to the end of a book. I now know that's not true. And I find that a little bit paralyzing. So I rewrite a lot as I go. So I think somebody on Twitter was describing, maybe it was V. Schwab, was saying that she just like kind of writes every scene out of order. Like, you just dump like 20 lines and then slowly assemble them like a jigsaw puzzle. I think that I do that.
I do that as
I
do that as well. Yeah.
Like, I have sort of a beginning and sort of an end, and then I just slowly sort all the pieces together, especially with dialogue. People who just naturally write flowing dialogue just blow my mind. Because, like, usually, I don't know, I'm just maybe not that clever a person in dialogue, so like I have to go back and make the setups work and make the flow of natural conversation work. And it's a lot of jigsaw puzzling for a really long time. I'm not fast at all. What do you do? Please explain to me how I can be a better writer.
No, I'm exactly the same, except probably not as good even. Putting those pieces together. It's what I tend. I mean, one thing I do tend to start with dialogue. Like, most of my early drafts are characters talking for very long stretches of time. My finished drafts are characters talking for very long stretches of time. But no, I mean, the short answer is that I basically just write down the bits that I know and am really excited about, and then I sort of roughly assemble where those pieces are going to go, and then I sort of take a step back and plan and try to work out what goes in the gaps. And then I'll come up with a few more things that I know are going to happen that I'm excited about and dive into those. And eventually,
it's a book.
Eventually I have to force myself to close the last few gaps, and then it's a book. Yeah.
I like that. So you don't use like a what do they call this, beat sheets, or like plug it into things like Save the Cat. I've learned from other writers that there are things that help you with pacing that I've completely ignored thus far, and I think I'm going to continue to ignore. But I'm always curious who uses them and who doesn't.
Yeah, no, and I think they're fascinating. I can't. For me, story doesn't work like that. And I think it's fascinating for the people for whom it does. You know, it must be so lovely to have like a structure like that. I say the only thing that the best tip I sort of only learned about pacing was only sort of works in revision, which is where you just, after you've got your first draft, you go through and just sort of bullet point what happens in each chapter. This might be from Melissa Carisso, actually. I'm not sure who it's from. But yeah, you just go through and bullet point what happens in each chapter, and you sort of color code what is the big action happening, what is the smaller action happening, and so you can kind of get a visual look at what, you know, how many big stakes things and how many small stakes things are happening in each chapter, and see where that works. but otherwise, yeah, it's really just yeah,
It's messy.
It's just
I'm
what
very
am I?
messy as a writer.
Yeah, me too. It's such a mess, and it's really just what am I excited about writing, and what can I hear happening, and put that on the page, and then afterwards go through and sort of work out where the actual stories emerged, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's also what's an aspect of your book that you love but never get to talk about or would like to talk about more?
Oh goodness.
I'm using this time to desperately think of an answer, just so that you know. You take your time.
Yeah, no, so am I. So am I. If you heard a loud explosion, that was the guinea pigs. Making noise.
Who are named Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, is that correct? Norrell?
Yes, Jonathan Strange, Norrell, and Thistledown. Yeah.
Thistledown, right, I forgot that one.
Thistledown, yeah. He's the fairy king. He is a weird guinea pig, you know, if you're wondering.
Which is great because I wouldn't know what a normal guinea pig was like. Like, I wouldn't have a comparative there.
A comparative? No. But I don't know. The question wasn't about guinea pigs, but I'm going to filling in time by talking about the guinea pigs. Yeah, we somehow managed to name that Jonathan Strange is the sort of bossy, independent, wants his own way. Mr. Norrell is the quiet, timid one who stays in the corner and screams if you frighten him. And Thistledown was the sort of weird little white runt who nearly died at birth, and now he thinks he's a person. So yeah, there you go. I just seen in the comments the guinea pigs did. I just saw someone say the guinea pigs didn't explode; they just made a lot of noise and sounded like they were exploding.
No guinea pigs were harmed in the making of this interview.
Yeah. Please, they're totally fine. I promise. They just have complaints. Have you thought of an answer? Because I haven't.
A little bit, but mine's hard because literally nobody's read my book yet except a couple of people. So not getting to talk about it is relative. But my favorite thing that I got to do in this book that I feel like is going to have a very low payoff because it's the kind of thing that most readers are not going to care at all about, and I don't blame them, is that like I told myself this is an alternate world where witchcraft exists, and so I sort of like rewrote women into history as if they'd had just a little bit more agency than they did. So there's like it's the Sisters Grimm instead of the Brothers Grimm, and it's like the famous writers of the era are women writers, and like there's all these little things that I just flipped around, and it gave me deep joy. Like, and I pretended like a translator of the Odyssey early on was a woman when really the first woman to translate the Odyssey was like 2 seconds ago. So those tiny little Easter
that was
eggs
Alexandra
that only matter.
I loved it. Yeah.
No one will care, but I did.
No, I love that completely. I say I'm the same that I didn't. I haven't been asked a lot of questions about the book yet, even though it's come out. So it's hard to know what you didn't want to talk about. But I have to say, no. I mean, I kind of loved doing that too. With trying to play that game where I was trying to say how many real life quotes, and it's obvious in some of the big debates, but not so obvious in some of the other places. I was trying to see how many real life quotes you could encode into it, and that was a whole thing in itself. But also partly how much stuff you could encode, but sort of twist it so that it's a quote that's about magic as opposed to a quote that's about other principles, you know. And there was there's a tremendous amount of fun.
Yeah, I got to have
thinking.
Witches of the World unite in my book, which I'm pretty happy about. I had that idea as soon as I came up with the concept, and I was like, this is happening. Like, someone is going to say this on a poster at some point. You should definitely do an annotated version of your book, because I would love to know which of the quotes are actual quotes. You should highlight them, and it would be great.
Oh yeah, no, I'd love to do that. I should, yeah. Yeah, except I can't. If I can't do, I want someone to do it because I hate. I'm terrified of scribbling on books, but I have to.
Oh no, it's
I have
great.
to do
Do it.
that. Yeah. But yeah, it's a really good question. Sorry for the tangent about mechanics.
Do you want to pick the next one? I think I picked that one.
Yes. Yeah. Oh. Somebody and okay, one just jumped up the top. What's an unlikely influence on your work that something readers might not expect to have been formative? That's an interesting one.
I mean, I feel like most of my influences are pretty obvious, and I think Jonathan Strange is one for both of us. Maybe more obviously yours.
Yeah. Though it was funny because when I did the first draft, I hadn't read it yet. I didn't know about it. I was kind of working, if I was working from anything, I was working from the Naomi Novik's Temeria books.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, this was very early on, so obviously it's been a huge influence over the last few years. But the very first time I hadn't found it yet. Which is interesting.
That's really interesting. I would have so much guessed that it was almost an answer to it, because if I have a criticism of Jonathan Strange, it's an extremely and exclusively English novel. Like, you get these amazing glimpses of sort of subaltern voices and people who are traditionally excluded from Victorian narratives, and then but they're not quite in the focus. Like it doesn't really care that there's an empire. That book doesn't. It doesn't really.
No.
You know, it's limiting.
Yes,
its
no, I know
perspectives.
exactly.
And yours a little bit feels like, also, here's what's happening in the Caribbean, P.S., and by the way. And I just feel like it's interesting that you would have written that without first reading and responding to Jonathan Strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I read and respond. You know, I've rewritten it so many times over the years that it absolutely became that. You know, it was only the very early ones. It wasn't quite where it started. But definitely, yeah, I think with Jonathan Strange, which I love completely, it's absolute genius. And yeah, it is a little bit about that there are these kind of tantalizing glimpses of, I mean, you know, like Stephen is obviously in that book. And so there is this kind of, you know, there's this thread of empire and enslavement and, you know, and him regaining, you know, power at the end. But
he is the king, I know. And I actually think there's something to be said for a book that does that so subtly. Like, it's undercutting a specific kind of narrative about who the great men are. And I think there's a subtlety to it that's really smart. And I don't actually think that it's blind to the conditions of empire or anything like that. But it is, you know.
No, definitely. Yeah. It's just a thread that is in the book that you can sort of say, can I take this and see if I can do a little bit more with it, whereas the book has a whole lot of other threads. Yeah, definitely.
And the same could be said of women's voices in that book. Like, you know, you get these amazing hints, particularly in the short story collection, of like what the ladies of Grace are doing. They're definitely messing around with magic on their own terms. They're definitely not like calling up the papers and being like, I would like to publish an article about this. But it's not the focus of the narrative. Other than that book being a huge influence, I'm trying to think what else I would list. I did try to get like a lot of my witchy influences mentioned in there. Like, at some point, there's a character whose middle name is Pecola, like Serafina Pecola from
I love it.
from the Golden Compass books.
No, great. Yeah, I was going to say the other. I think I don't know if it's something people wouldn't expect because I said it on Twitter, but I was going to say the style. By the end, it was like definitely Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and the other one I talked about Hilary Mantel's A Place of Greater Safety, which is for those who haven't read it, it's a version of it's just a very, very dense detailed, almost kind of day by day at times version, account of the French Revolution that's kind of through from the perspective, and it's basically kind of like in the book, it's from Robespierre, it's from Camille Desmoulins, and it's from Danton, and and it switches between their perspectives and some of the others. But just when I read it, which was quite a way into into drafting the book, and I feel the same with Wolf Hall. I just think I love the kind of audacity of the way she's just does these, jumps right into these scenes that are very long, very character based, very dialogue driven, and lets it play out in all that density. And I didn't quite go that as far as that, because I'm not a Man Booker Prize winner, but I can't get away with that. But I think it was definitely the fact that you could sort of you can do that. You can let yourself get into the dialogue and the characters and that kind of intersection of politics and personality was something that I really loved that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we've got 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
And we've covered most of what we want to talk about, but I did want to ask, and this feels really obvious or something, but why, since you've mentioned a couple of books that are just straight up historical fiction, why did you add vampires? Why make this book a historical fantasy? What was the thing you were trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, it was twofold, really. And I mean, it's something that I hope was originally played out over one book, and I hope it's now going to play out over two. The first one was just that I wanted to see if I could use magic to just really heighten and exaggerate some of the historical stuff that was going on, and really pull it. Yeah, I think it's partly, when you do a historical fiction, you sort of feel like it feels like you're sort of constrained to historical accuracy in the sense that you're trying to represent what's really there. But even when you're writing historical fiction, you're turning it into a story. You're making stuff up. You're hypothesizing. So historical fantasy feels like a way that you can just outright go, yes, we're absolutely making this into a story. We're mythologizing it. We're making it up. And you can use magic to kind of highlight those things, especially those kind of questions of power. And if you make, how far do you, if you want to sort of get the power to change the world, how far do you go to do that? What do you compromise on? What kind of power do you want to wield? And by making that about magical power, that becomes, a way of talking about that. And that was the other side of it, is that it's, and increasingly as it goes on, I wanted to start keeping it quite historically accurate and keeping it with the historical figures that we've known. But then as it goes on, let the magic kind of shift things and start to kind of creep in and change things. Just a little bit like basically what we're talking about with Jonathan Strange, isn't it? That, so just let the magic kind of take you off history a bit and let it kind of bring people into the frame who didn't have the chance to be there in real life, or didn't have that way of acting out in real life, and seeing where that goes. So it's about, I guess it's the short answer, it's about kind of amplifying the history on the one hand, and about seeing what you can do to shift it on the other, I guess.
That's exactly what I would have answered. So I should have made you ask me this question.
You could have said it first. Yeah.
I messed this up.
You gave me the good one.
It's interesting that Jonathan Strange ends right at the moment where the timeline would be seriously messed up. She gets to have a lot of historical specificity and accuracy, and at the moment that magic is for real back and everything has changed, book is over. Which is such a shame. It makes me very interested to read your sequel. Because the magic you're introducing is exaggerates a lot of what was happening. But I will just say the combination of guillotines and necromancy is an extremely powerful one, and I'm very interested in that and where that goes.
And what about you? Was it kind of a similar thing with yours, or?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I wanted the idea that women's magic had been brutally taken away and the witch burnings were real and they really did burn all the witches. That I felt like a pretty good, metaphorical thing for how women's power has been taken away and no longer exists, and women's voices have been silenced and all that. But then the other side of it is that like closing the gaps, like that women were hugely disempowered, and I wanted to use magic to like make them less so. And I gave myself permission to kind of cheat in that way.
Definitely, yeah. Yes, yeah, no, I know, and you have that. I've that quote in the book about magic being what I'm I'm going to get it wrong, so I didn't write it down.
No, it's that magic is the space between what you have and what you need.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. Sorry, I should have written that down. No. I did write it down in the notes, but I don't have those in front of me.
I'm cheating with my phone.
But it is, and I think that. Yeah. No, and I know, and I think that that is such a powerful thing. And it's that question, isn't it? To what extent are you using magic to emphasize what's there? But on the other hand, magic has this power to change things and to do good, and so you've got to let it do that.
Yeah, and it is a little bit of a hard balance, though, and I'm sure you felt the same thing of like you don't want to use magic as like a wonderful escape route so that the oppressed people don't actually experience their historical oppression and don't really, like
definitely.
You don't want to overwrite the horrors of history and the things that really happened. And that's one reason, and spoilers for my book, like it doesn't end with people magically getting the vote. Like it's not a triumphal march kind of a thing, because like the realities of suffrage, I didn't want to erase those, but I also didn't want to wallow in the trauma and the horror of it, because that's not who I am as a person. Yeah. And it's a weird balance. Definitely a weird balance.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'm going to choose. We've got a couple minutes left, and I want to try to get a couple more of the audience ones. So what's the best way of capturing a historical feel while still taking some liberties with the facts of time? But there was also another question, which I feel like this goes together well, which is if you're using historical elements, how do you get yourselves in the right mindset to write the eras while still being critical of their social norms?
Well, yeah, those are both really good questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is something that the being critical of the social norms thing is something that's so hard when you're writing historical people, because you don't want to give them especially when you're dealing with real people. When my when you're dealing with real historical figures who had real views, you want to represent, those views, but at the same time, you don't, when they have views that are stuck in their time, that you don't want to have.
And they're your heroes. And you don't want to accidentally valorize the horrible things that they thought.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But at the same time, you don't want to try and build them up as heroes who had perfectly modern viewpoints when they didn't. And that's, that's there. And so that's partly, I think, why I wanted to have so many viewpoints in that story, was because I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't, holding there are a lot of different things going on, and there's not one way of fighting for things or whatever. It's I'm not upholding any one of those characters as having a perfect moral vision, because they didn't. They were in their time, and even the ones that were trying to do good were obviously blind to a lot of things, as everybody is, even nowadays. So that's the balance. And I'd say the other thing about the historical time period was that that you're sort of juggling is how deep, how do you kind of capture the dialogue of that time without making it too distancing, because you don't want to do that thing where people speak without contractions and sound really stiff, but at the same time you want to keep that keep that flavor in a way. So it's kind of about finding that balance between making them sound like people and yet making them keeping that right. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. With the social norms thing, that was definitely tricky, because as we've covered, suffragists weren't universally great. They had a lot of and it's very hard to look at a lot of the women, particularly in the US at least, that we've upheld as sort of the heroes of the women's vote, who were like fully throwing Black women and other women of color under the bus. And so I didn't want to hang out with those people narratively. Like, I didn't want to make them my heroes. And so the book ended up with 3 people who are outside of that suffrage culture who kind of come into it from the outside, and also it got, as you said, a lot more characters. Like I tried to make it more about a social movement that had like multiple groups and factions, and like some people who were explicitly like, ooh, should Black women be part of our group, and other women who were like more radical and made alliances. Like I kept thinking about, I want to say it's not till like 1911. Ooh, I don't even know my history. When the Women's March on Washington, the first Women's March on Washington, Ida B. Wells shows up and is asked to march at the back, and not with, which Ida B. Wells shows up to your march and you ask her to go to the back, which is insane. And she was like, sure, definitely, I'll do that. And then she circled back around and marched at the front at the last second, which is amazing. And I keep thinking about the white women who asked her to go to the back, and then also the fact that there were 3 white women who marched with her at the front when she circled back around. So there were like these complexities, and like there were plenty of individuals who were more enlightened than others. And the same way not everyone in 2020 has the same level of like enlightenment. Obviously, I tried to put a little bit of that in the book, but it was very difficult and complicated. I'm not sure still that I pulled it off. So we are officially over time. I guess what I'm going to say is thank everyone so much for coming and listening to us. It was really wonderful to get to talk to you about your nerdy historical book. I feel like this was a good match.
And likewise, yes. No, thank you. And thank you for everyone sending in questions. They've been so interesting.
Yeah, we didn't even get to them all. They were so good.
I know.
I'm sorry.
I might try and I've seen now that I might try and answer some of these on Twitter or something, because they're so interesting.
So you can find both of us on Twitter, and there's more Orbit events in the future, and have a good, I guess it's already tomorrow where you are, Hannah, so enjoy tomorrow. I hope it goes well.
And enjoy your evening back in the past.
It's great back here. It's fine. Don't tell me what's coming. I don't really want to know. Okay, see you, everybody.
Great. Okay, see you.